I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would plot revenge. Honestly, I always saw myself as the turn the other cheek type. But betrayal has a way of reshaping your soul, of twisting something deep inside you until the only thing that makes sense is balance, no matter how dark it has to be. And what he did to me, that wasn't just betrayal, that was annihilation. His name is Caleb. We met during our freshman year of college, and for the longest time, I thought he was my best friend. The kind of friend you trust with everything. Your dreams, your fears, your most embarrassing secrets. I was painfully shy and still recovering from a traumatic incident in high school. Caleb made me feel safe. He was charismatic, confident, and the kind of person everyone wanted to be around. And I was grateful to be part of his orbit. Over the years, I told him things I'd never told anyone. Things that still made me wake up in cold sweats at night. One of those secrets was the worst moment of my life. When I was 17, I tried to take my own life. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's part of me. It's the reason I advocate for mental health awareness now. Caleb was the first person I ever told. He hugged me, told me he was honored I trusted him, and promised me my secret was safe forever. But forever lasted exactly 4 years. It happened on a random Friday night at a house party. Caleb and I had grown apart a bit. He was deep into a new friend group that I didn't vibe with, but we were still close enough to hang out occasionally. That night, after a few drinks, I noticed people looking at me strangely. Some were whispering, others were outright staring, and then I heard it. She tried to kill herself when she was 17. A girl slurred, laughing. Can you believe that? Caleb said she even wrote a note. The world stopped. At first I thought I misheard. But no. Caleb was standing across the room, basking in attention, telling my story like it was a funny anecdote. He even did this mocking tone when quoting what I'd told him in confidence. And people were laughing. They were laughing at the most painful, vulnerable thing I had ever shared. I confronted him later that night, shaking with rage and humiliation. He barely looked remorseful. Relax, he said, rolling his eyes. Everyone's got shit. It's not that deep. Not that deep. That night, something inside me broke. But from the pieces, something new grew. Colder, sharper. I decided Caleb wasn't just going to regret betraying me. He was going to wish he'd never met me. The plan started small. I knew Caleb had secrets too. Lots of them. He was reckless, impulsive, and far too trusting of me. Over the years, I'd collected them like puzzle pieces. I knew about the cheating. On 3 girlfriends. I knew about the fake internship he bragged about on his resume. I knew about the time he stole money from his roommate and blamed it on a stranger, and most importantly, I knew about his biggest, darkest secret, that he'd been expelled from a high school 2 towns over for something far worse than anyone realized. It took months to lay the groundwork. I started by befriending people in his new social circle, subtly planting seeds of doubt about his character. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make them watch him differently. When his girlfriend, a sweet girl named Amelia, started confiding in me, I gently mentioned that Caleb wasn't always faithful in past relationships. A month later, she found texts on his phone from another woman. Breakup, first domino down, then came his career. Caleb had landed an internship at a prestigious marketing firm based largely on the experience he claimed to have. I anonymously emailed HR with documents, screenshots of old chats, copies of his resume, and a timeline that proved his internship was fabricated. Within a week, he was dismissed. But the pièce de résistance, the crown jewel of my revenge, was the secret about his past. It turned out Caleb wasn't just expelled for bad behavior, as he told everyone. He had been involved in a hazing incident that sent another student to the hospital. It was covered up, sealed, and forgotten. But I had evidence. Copies of old news clippings, a redacted police report, even a confession message he once drunkenly sent me. I built a website. Nothing flashy. Just a minimalist blog with anonymous submissions, labeled The Real Caleb. I laid everything out in chronological order, backing every accusation with documentation. Screenshots, receipts, photos, all of it. I didn't post it anywhere directly. I didn't need to. I just sent the link to a few strategic people. His boss, his professors, his parents. The rest spread like wildfire. Overnight, Caleb's reputation imploded. Friends ghosted him. His name became poison in every group chat. His parents stopped paying his rent. His chances of getting a job in marketing, or anywhere that required integrity, vanished. And I watched it all unfold, one glorious consequence at a time. The last time I saw him was 6 months later, sitting alone on a park bench near campus. He looked smaller, like life itself had drained out of him. He saw me, and for a second I thought he might come over. Apologize, maybe. But he didn't. He just lowered his head and walked away. I wish I could say I felt guilty, that some part of me regretted how far I took it. But I didn't. He tore open my deepest wound for entertainment, and I returned the favor by showing the world who he truly was. That wasn't cruelty. That was justice. And justice, I've learned, is far more satisfying than forgiveness ever could be. But the story doesn't quite end there. Because as much as I believed I'd closed that chapter, the universe had other plans. Caleb wasn't done. And neither, it seemed, was I. It started with anonymous messages. Strange emails from burner accounts. At first, they were just insults, then threats. You ruined my life. I know it was you. You're going to pay. I ignored them. But one morning, I woke up to find my car keyed and the words "psycho bitch" spray painted across the hood. That's when I knew Caleb was unraveling. And if I didn't finish what I started, he might drag me down with him. So I decided to end it, once and for all. I knew Caleb wouldn't stop. The humiliation, the loss, the collapse of everything he'd built. It was too much for someone like him to swallow. He was narcissistic to the core. People like that don't accept defeat. They fixate. They obsess. And when they're cornered, they lash out. The next step had to be more than just retaliation. It had to be annihilation. If Caleb wanted a war, I was prepared to fight one he couldn't win. First, I tightened my defenses. I backed up every piece of evidence I'd ever collected. Multiple encrypted drives, cloud storage, even a physical USB hidden in a safety deposit box. I reported the vandalism to the police and gave them the messages. They filed a report, but didn't do much else. That was fine. I wasn't relying on them anyway. Then I started watching him. Not obsessively, just enough to know where he went, who he talked to, how he spent his time. It wasn't hard. Caleb had no idea how to be subtle. His anger was obvious. He posted vague threats on social media. He drunk ranted in bars about a certain backstabbing bitch. And the more he spiraled, the easier it became to anticipate his next move. It turned out Caleb was trying to dig up dirt on me. He contacted people from my past, asking questions. He even reached out to my estranged father, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, trying to find anything he could use. That was when I realized how desperate he was. And desperation makes people sloppy. One night, a friend sent me a screenshot of a private group chat Caleb had started. In it, he bragged about how he was collecting evidence to expose me. He shared half-truths, lies, and some personal information he had no right to share. But he also revealed something much more interesting. He'd been selling prescription drugs to classmates. Not weed, not party drugs, oxycodone. And he was stupid enough to document it in writing. I didn't go to the police. That would have been too quick, too clean. Instead, I took a page out of his own playbook. I created a fake persona, a sophomore journalism student named Leah, who was writing an exposé on campus drug dealing. I built the fake profile meticulously, complete with a LinkedIn, a believable Instagram, and a trail of mutual connections. Then I reached out to Caleb. At first, he ignored me. Then curiosity got the better of him. We started chatting. I acted naive, starstruck even, like I thought he was some kind of rebellious anti-hero. Within days, he was bragging. Screenshots, photos, even voice notes. All proof that he was still dealing. Once I had enough, I packaged it all into a neat little dossier and sent it anonymously to the dean, the local police, and, for good measure, his parents. The fallout was immediate. Caleb was expelled within 2 weeks. The police opened an investigation, and his parents, already furious with him, cut him off completely. He was evicted from his apartment and forced to move back home. A 26-year-old failure with no degree, no job, and a criminal record on the horizon. You'd think that would have been enough. And maybe for most people, it would have been. But Caleb wasn't most people. And by that point, neither was I. I had changed. The timid, wounded person who once begged for his friendship was gone. What remained was someone colder, smarter, patient. And I wanted him to feel the weight of everything he had done. Not just lose, but understand why he lost. That's when I wrote the letter. It was anonymous, of course. Typed, printed, and mailed from a town 2 hours away. It arrived at his parents' house 3 days after his expulsion. I know this because I was parked in a rental car down the street, watching from behind tinted windows. It read, "This is what happens when you weaponize someone's pain. This is what happens when you laugh at a wound you didn't create, but were trusted to protect. Every humiliation you feel, every door that closes, every look of disappointment, it's a mirror of what you did to me. You turned my trauma into a punchline. I turned your life into a cautionary tale. Now, every time you see the wreckage around you, remember, you did this, you started this, and you taught me how to finish it." I watched his mother read it on the porch. I watched her call for him, panic in her voice. I watched Caleb emerge, disheveled, hollow-eyed, a shell of the arrogant boy who once mocked me in front of a room full of strangers. He read the letter, and then, for the first time in all the years I had known him, I saw tears. Real ones. It was over. The war was done. For months after, I tried to move on. I poured myself into work, into therapy, into rebuilding the pieces of my life that Caleb had shattered. And for a while, it worked. I felt lighter, freer, like I had reclaimed something that was stolen from me. But there's a strange thing about revenge. Even when you win, it lingers. There's always a part of you that wonders if you went too far, and a darker part that whispers, not far enough. About a year later, I heard through the grapevine that Caleb had been arrested again, this time for assault. He'd gotten into a bar fight and put someone in the hospital. He served 3 months in county jail and was released with probation. After that, he vanished from social media completely. No one seemed to know where he went. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what became of him. Maybe he's living in some small town, trying to piece together what's left of his life. Maybe he's still angry, still blaming me for everything. Or maybe, just maybe, he's finally realized that he was the architect of his own destruction. As for me, I don't regret what I did. Not a single thing. People always say revenge is a poison you drink, hoping someone else will die. But in my case, revenge was the antidote, the only thing that purged the toxicity he left inside me. And if I'm being completely honest, I'd do it all again. Because some secrets should stay buried. And if you're cruel enough to dig them up and wave them around for applause, you deserve to be buried with them. But before you judge me too harshly, let me ask you something. If someone turned your deepest pain into a joke, would you really forgive them? Would you really just move on? Or would you, like me, make sure they never forgot the price of betrayal? I know my answer, and I've made peace with it, or at least, I thought I had. 2 years after Caleb disappeared, I got a letter. No return address, no handwriting I recognized, just a single sheet of paper, folded neatly inside an unmarked envelope. I learned from the best. No name, no threat, just that. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since that night at the party. Fear. I don't know if Caleb is still out there, plotting, waiting for his moment. I don't know if he's even capable of striking back anymore. But I do know one thing. If he does, I'll be ready. Because once you've crossed that line, once you've embraced the darkness inside you, there's no going back. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Revenge doesn't end. It echoes. It ripples. It becomes part of you. And whether you like it or not, once you let it in, it never truly leaves. The letter haunted me. It sat on my nightstand for weeks, a small white ghost that refused to let me sleep. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe even a prank. But deep down, I knew better. Caleb wasn't gone. He was waiting. And worse, he had learned patience. I started watching over my shoulder again. Every unfamiliar face on the street. Every car that seemed to follow me for more than a few blocks. They all made my heart race. I changed my routines. I took different routes to work. I avoided social media completely. But the paranoia followed me everywhere. Then one evening, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But the air felt wrong. Like someone had been there. And on my kitchen table, where I always left my keys, was a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me, taken through my living room window. There was no note this time, no message, just the photo. I should have gone to the police again, but I knew how that would go. They'd take a report, nod sympathetically, and do nothing. There was no proof Caleb was behind it. Hell, there was no proof anyone was behind it. But I knew. This was his way of saying, I'm still here. That night, something inside me snapped. Fear gave way to fury. I was done hiding, done waiting. If Caleb wanted a final chapter, I was going to write it. And I was going to make sure it ended with me standing on top. I started digging again. I traced every fragment of his digital footprint. Old usernames, burner emails, suspicious Venmo transactions. It took weeks, but eventually I found a lead. A cheap motel 2 towns over where someone matching his description had been staying on and off for months. I drove there on a rainy Tuesday night, parked across the street, and waited. At 2:17 a.m., I saw him. Caleb looked nothing like the person I remembered. He was thinner, gaunt, with a patchy beard and eyes that darted around like a hunted animal. He wore the same clothes for days, judging by the stains. But despite the wreckage, despite the ruin I'd left him in, there was still a spark in his gaze. Hatred, pure and undiluted. I didn't approach him. Not yet. I followed him. Over the next few days, I tracked his every move. He spent most of his time in a rundown cafe, always sitting in the same corner with a cheap laptop. He wasn't working. He was watching. He had dozens of tabs open. Social media profiles, news articles about me, even my company website. He was obsessed. That was when I decided it wasn't enough to destroy his life. I needed to erase me from his entirely. So I staged my own death. It sounds dramatic, and maybe it was, but it was the only way I could think to end the cycle. I started by slowly deleting my online presence. I closed accounts, scrubbed old posts, and set up forwarding addresses. Then I created a fake identity, a new name, a new email, a new life. The final step was the accident. I left my car parked by a bridge with the key still inside. I made sure my phone, wiped clean, but with just enough data to look normal, was on the seat. And then I vanished. For 6 months, I lived like a ghost. I moved to a different state, rented a small apartment under a different name, and cut off contact with everyone I knew. And for a while, it worked. Caleb disappeared. The emails stopped. The messages stopped. The fear faded. But here's the thing about ghosts. Sometimes they haunt themselves. Every night, I'd lie awake wondering if he knew, if he'd seen through the ruse, if he was still out there waiting for me to slip. And the longer I lived this new life, the more I realized I wasn't free. I was imprisoned, not by Caleb, but by the very revenge I'd sought so desperately. Then one morning, a package arrived at my new apartment. No return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from my old city, an article about a missing woman whose car had been found abandoned. And written across the headline in red ink were 4 words: "I know you're alive." My hands shook as I held it. It wasn't just a message. It was proof. He knew. Somehow, someway, Caleb had followed the breadcrumbs. And if he knew I was alive, then this wasn't over. Not yet. I considered running again, changing everything. But something in me refused. I was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of being afraid, tired of letting this man define my life. So instead, I made a decision. If Caleb wanted an ending, I was going to give him one. But it would be on my terms. I crafted a plan. One final act of vengeance. One last lesson. And this time, it wouldn't be about ruining his reputation or sabotaging his future. This time, it would be personal. I began reaching out to people from Caleb's past. The ones who still hated him. The ones he'd burned long before he betrayed me. There were more than I expected. An ex-girlfriend who'd lost everything because of his lies. A former business partner he'd scammed. A classmate he'd bullied relentlessly. They all had stories. They all had scars. And they all wanted closure. Together, we formed a kind of coalition. A quiet, invisible network bound by shared rage. And slowly we started building a case. Not legal, social. We gathered evidence. We created anonymous profiles. We crafted narratives. And then we unleashed them, one by one. At first it was small. A leaked story here. A damning photo there. Then it snowballed. Caleb's name became radioactive online. He was blacklisted from jobs. Landlords refused to rent to him. Even local charities turned him away. We didn't stop there. One of our group, a tech-savvy woman Caleb had harassed in college, hacked into his email and found proof of fraudulent activity on his taxes. That went straight to the IRS. Another discovered he'd falsified documents to get government benefits. That went to the authorities too. Piece by piece, his world collapsed again. Only this time, it wasn't a single blow. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And every cut came from someone he'd wronged. The final nail came from an unexpected source. One of our members, the boy he'd bullied in high school, had become a journalist. And he published a feature-length exposé titled "The Man Who Ruined Everyone Else's Life." It went viral. Millions read it. Caleb's name became synonymous with cruelty, betrayal, and downfall. His face was plastered across every corner of the internet. Not as a victim, but as a warning. And when I finally saw him again, in a grainy news photo, head down, being led away in handcuffs for tax fraud, I knew it was over. Truly over. It's been 3 years since that day. I've rebuilt my life. I use my real name again. I speak openly about mental health, about betrayal, about trauma, about revenge. People tell me I'm strong, that I overcame so much, that I should be proud. And I am. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about Caleb. I wonder if he ever realized what he taught me. That monsters don't always come with sharp teeth or claws. Sometimes they come in the form of a friend. And sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become one yourself. If I could go back and change anything, would I? No. Because in the end, justice wasn't just served. It was sculpted, crafted, engineered. And though it cost me my peace, it gave me something far more powerful. Closure. And if he's still out there, somewhere, thinking of me, I hope he remembers every single thing I did. Because I remember everything he did. And if I had to, I'd do it all again. After all, some secrets should never be told, and those who betray them should never forget what happens when they do. People often ask me now, when I speak publicly, or when I share fragments of my story online, if I think revenge really solved anything. They want a clean moral conclusion. They want me to say that vengeance isn't worth it, that it didn't heal me, that it left me hollow. But that's not the truth. The truth is more complicated. Revenge didn't make me happy. It didn't erase the pain, or the humiliation, or the nights I spent crying on my bathroom floor after Caleb exposed my secret. It didn't magically restore the trust I'd lost in people. But it did something else, something deeper, more primal. It gave me agency again. It gave me back the power he had taken from me when he turned my suffering into entertainment. And maybe that's all justice really is, the act of reclaiming power from those who abused it. Life moved forward, slowly. I found new friends, people who knew my story from the beginning, and still chose to stand beside me. I fell in love with someone kind and patient, someone who knew about my scars and didn't try to pretend they weren't there. I started working for a non-profit focused on mental health advocacy, telling young people that their pain was valid, that their stories were worth protecting. But no matter how far I went, Caleb's ghost followed me. Not as a threat anymore. Not as a presence lurking around the corner, but as a reminder, a scar that would never quite fade. And in a strange way, I was grateful for it, because that scar reminded me who I had become, someone who would never, ever let betrayal go unanswered again. One afternoon, about 2 years after the final article destroyed Caleb's name, I got a message request on social media. The username was unfamiliar, The profile was empty. The message was simple. "I'm sorry." My chest tightened. I knew immediately who it was. I didn't respond. I stared at the message for a long time, minutes, maybe hours, and debated what to do. Part of me wanted to type back, "Too late." Another part of me wanted to ignore it entirely. In the end, I just closed the app. He had said his piece, and I had already said mine, in the form of every consequence he now lived with. Weeks later, a friend sent me an article from a local paper. Caleb had pleaded guilty to several charges: tax fraud, possession, identity theft, and had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. According to the article, he'd broken down in court, begging the judge for leniency. The judge had shown none. Reading those words, I felt nothing. No triumph, no joy, not even satisfaction. Just a cold, quiet certainty that everything that happened, everything we did, had been inevitable from the moment he opened his mouth at that party. Betrayal demands balance. And now, finally, the scales were even. I visited that bridge once, the one where I'd left my car, pretending to vanish. I leaned against the railing and stared down at the water, thinking about the person I'd been before all of this. The naive, desperate to please, people-pleasing version of me who believed secrets were sacred and friendships were forever. That person was gone. And in their place stood someone harder, sharper, less trusting, but infinitely stronger. And maybe that's the hidden truth about revenge. It doesn't just change the person you target. It changes you. It reshapes you in ways you can't undo. Sometimes I wonder if Caleb and I were always destined to destroy each other. Two broken people locked in a slow-motion collision. Maybe he betrayed me because he was weak, and I destroyed him because I was strong. Or maybe we were both weak, and revenge was the only language either of us truly understood. I don't know, and maybe it doesn't matter. What I do know is this: if you betray someone, if you take their deepest pain and use it to amuse a crowd, you might think you're untouchable. You might laugh. You might shrug it off and tell them to relax. But one day, maybe not today or tomorrow, they will come for you, and they will know you better than anyone else ever could. They will know where to hit. They will know how to make it hurt. They will know how to make it last. And when that day comes, you will finally understand that betrayal isn't a punchline. It's a debt, and debts get paid. I stood on that bridge for a long time, watching the water rush below me, and I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't plotting or hiding or obsessing. I was free. Caleb had taken so much from me. But in trying to break me, he had forged something unbreakable. And that, more than the ruined career, more than the destroyed reputation, more than the prison sentence, was my real revenge. I walked away from the bridge and never looked back. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about him. I wonder if he ever tells his version of the story. If somewhere out there's a podcast where he's the victim and I'm the villain. And maybe in his eyes, I am. Maybe I crossed too many lines. Maybe I became exactly what I swore I'd never be. But here's the thing about villains. They don't think they're evil. They think they're right. And deep down, I know I was. He told everyone my deepest secret. I showed everyone his. And in the end, the difference between us was simple. I never lied about who I was. So, if you're listening to this, and you're carrying a secret someone betrayed, if someone weaponized your vulnerability and turned it into their entertainment, know this: you are not powerless. You are not weak. and you are not alone. The pain they caused you is not the end of your story. It can be the beginning of theirs. And maybe, just maybe, justice isn't about forgiveness at all. Maybe it's about teaching people like Caleb that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. This was my story. And if he's out there listening, this is the ending he earned. Because I'm still here, still breathing, still unbroken. And he's just a cautionary tale.